At this moment in our field, when the stakes for the arts have never been higher, advocacy is no longer a side conversation. It's central to how we protect our work, sustain our institutions, and shape the future we want to see. Today's conversation invites us into something both timely and personal, an honest dialogue about civic responsibility and influence, and why it matters more than ever. We're honored to welcome Erin Harkey, CEO of Americans for the Arts. Erin brings clarity, conviction, and a deep understanding of what it takes to turn values into action. Erin has over 20 years of experience helping individuals and communities succeed through the arts. She also served as the commissioner of the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. Erin served the city of Chicago as projects administrator, then deputy commissioner for programming, and first deputy commissioner. In her dual role as senior policy advisor for arts and culture in the mayor's office, she advised on cultural policy and art strategy across all city departments, all of them, and all of the agencies. She'll be joined by Ken Biberaj, the thoughtful, trusted host of Coffee with Ken, whose gift for conversation creates space for reflection, candor, and always very deep insight. Together, they explore how live performing arts leaders, through the mission of their work and impact of their reach, can build lasting influence locally and nationally. Ken Biberaj's Coffee with Ken podcast convenes leaders at the intersection of policy, business, and culture, drawing governors, CEOs, cultural icons, and luminaries into conversations that shape how communities compete and thrive. Some of them include Toney and Grammy Award-winning artists Leslie Odom Jr., Middleburg Film Festival founder Sheila C. Johnson, President of the New York Stock Exchange Lynn Martin, CEO of the Urban League Mark Morial, former U.S. Transportation Secretary and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, historian John Meacham, David Rubenstein, Governor Wes Moore, and so many more. This is an invitation to listen closely, think boldly, and see yourself as the change maker. Thank you. Let's welcome them to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Product placement, we gotta. Well, great to see you all. Erin, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And obviously, thank you to Lisa and APAP. Another round of applause for this amazing event. And I think we're biased. Also, thanks to them for their foresight in having a conversation about civics and advocacy. I just think it's so important that this is what they wanted today's conversation to be about. As Lisa mentioned, I'm Ken Biberaj. Who the heck am I? Why am I here? I host this thought leadership series called Coffee with Ken. We started it 5 years ago. We really focus on the nexus of business, politics, nonprofits, and culture. This one for me is personal. I spent about 12 years in New York City. I lived at 56 and 6, right down the street from the Hilton where we are today. My family actually reopened the iconic Russian Tea Room about a block away. We actually restored and reopened the iconic Lowe's Paradise Theater in the Bronx at the Grand Concourse and 188th Street. I ran for city council on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in 2013. I was endorsed by the League of Independent Theaters because I was so committed to the arts community, and I chaired the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce when I was here. So I come to you today as a fan of you, an advocate for the arts, and I'm honored to be with you today. So I just wanted to kind of share that background. But today we are focused on arts as a civic strategy, and there is no one better for us to have this conversation with than Erin Harkey, the CEO of Americans for the Arts. Erin, great to see you.
Good to see you. Good to be here. Hi, everybody.
So I think to start us off, you are relatively new to the job. You are coming on your 1-year anniversary. And I think it'd be great to have a 2-part question to start things off. So number one, why don't you just share with everyone a little bit about the organization, mandate, mission, and tell us about your first year. I'm sure it was exactly like you planned. I'm sure your 2025 mission, your strategic plan you laid out was exactly like you expected, right? So how was your first year?
Yeah. Well, Americans for the Arts is one of the sort of largest leading advocacy organizations in the country. It's non-discipline specific. It really is for every community across the country. Our mission is really just to advance and support the arts in this country, which is a pretty basic but big and important mission to have. The first year has been really challenging. I started in March, so we are coming up on that sort of 1-year anniversary, and sort of immediately, I think within weeks actually, we started to see real sort of instability in the federal government, and which had a sort of catastrophic effect on our organizations and our artists. So we've been dealing with that. But it's been, sort of part of the job this last year to really get out into communities and start to talk to people. And I'm really heartened by the work and sort of strength that I see in our community. And so that's been sort of a blessing through, I think, all of this, is just having the opportunity to connect with everybody.
Yeah. So just talk a little bit about your time. I mean, how much of your time in the last year were you spending maybe out in communities, meeting leaders, members, et cetera, versus out in DC and maybe reacting and responding to some of this uncertainty?
It's been both things. I think, we have a very strong team that's based in sort of Washington, D.C., that's been, tracking and sort of monitoring, I think, developments in Washington. But a big part of my job has been, again, just going out into sort of communities. I've been across the country, and really listening to people and having these sort of conversations to, figure out what's next.
Yeah. So as we think about arts as a civic strategy, I think so much of it is about overall level setting and then framing and setting the stage. For a layman, for someone like me who's not as daily involved in the arts, what is the overall impact of the arts in America economically? Like, for if you're on the Hill or you're talking to a governor, like what's the broad impact of the arts?
Yeah. When I give economic impact statistics, I sort of like give it with a little bit of a caveat, because I know that none of us are getting up every day because we're trying to contribute to the GDP. But it is important for a sense of scale, right? So $1.2 trillion industry, that's both the for-profit and nonprofit ecosystems combined, 5.6 million jobs, I think 4.8%, close to 5% contribution to the GDP. So it's massive. That's bigger than agriculture, construction, transportation in terms of its contribution.
Yeah.
And so when you start to think about those numbers, like the numbers that we're putting on the board, then it's important to think, like, you can't really take your eye off the ball, right? It's important to think about the health of the sector, because if it's not healthy, then there are economic, social, sort of human consequences to that. So yeah, it's a big, important part of the economy here in this country.
I want to give everybody the benefit of knowing a little bit more about your background. Lisa shared a little bit about it, but you come to this role from a breadth of experience, right? You were in government, both in Chicago as well as LA. You come from the advocacy perspective with nonprofits, industry. Talk a little bit about your own personal background and how it has best prepared you for this new role.
Yeah, well, I'm from Los Angeles originally. I moved to Chicago 10 years ago. one of the best decisions I've ever made. And I started my career working in nonprofits. Actually, my first job was at the District of Columbia Arts Center in Adams Morgan.
Wow.
Straight out of
Nice.
college. But have worked at local arts agencies primarily, certainly at nonprofits, sort of coming up, and then made the move to Chicago 10 years ago and sort of really worked my way up the ranks. I had every single job at DK's before I became commissioner. And so the majority of my sort of public service life has been at the intersection of art and government. My educational background is actually that I have a master's in urban planning. So I tend to think about cities and as infrastructure, and art as infrastructure within cities because of that sort of planning background. And I think one of the things that I was really able to do in Chicago and really has been how I approach the work is thinking about art sort of integrated through the entire enterprise of government and what that looks like for public health, what that looks like for planning and development, what that looks like for libraries and parks and all of the other sort of systems, and how the arts can really be leveraged to support overall sort of community health objectives.
So I want to drill down a little bit on that, right? Like arts as part of civic infrastructure, right? And then you talked about the magnitude of the dollars GDP, right? So I know that's not, exactly what you get out of bed fired up to think about, but let's just drill down on that a little bit, right? So if arts are part of civic infrastructure and there's real dollars and economic impact, would you say that arts are really as important as roads and workforce and education?
100%.
Right? So let's talk
More important.
more. So drill down on that, right? Like how should we be reframing the conversation, and how should folks in this audience be thinking about their own talking points to their community leaders and elected officials?
Not a nice to have. It's an essential part of what we do. And I think the arts are both joy, but I think they are both an indicator and a facilitator of functional, healthy societies. So they operate sort of like on both ends. And I think, they just have so much sort of practical utility in helping to, solve hard challenges. Every time we had, a really tough sort of nut to crack, we would always sort of invite artists to the table just to help, sort of shake up what we were looking at. And I think one of the ways is sort of communicators. There's just so many ways and sort of practical utility in which the arts can be integrated to, help communicate, help bring people together, help beautify, improve, like create a sense of community, right? So it really touches everything in terms of, sort of civic life and how it can integrate with all of these sort of different areas and really improve, circumstance.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I'm spending my time now in DC. It's been really quiet and boring lately. Not much happening down there. It's totally normal. I had to come to New York to get a restful night of sleep. Right. So we're seeing this shift at the federal level. You alluded to it. There's new leadership at the NEA, funding challenges, uncertainty. What should folks in this room know about what you're seeing firsthand in DC to either scare them, make them feel confident about this uncertainty, or also urgency for action?
Yeah. We had a little bit of a win recently. So the appropriations process is sort of final for the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it looks like the $277 million that both of those agencies had previously will hold.
That's good.
So that's good. That's it. That's a good outcome from, complete zeroing out, which was the original proposal. So, the fact that these agencies are still there means that we can continue the conversation about what they do and how they fund and how they function. So yeah, there's a tremendous amount of, uncertainty, instability. I think that we're really going to have to sort of work on the appropriations is just, one part of the process. But continuing to sort of remain diligent about, ensuring that these funds are accessible to all Americans is a real priority of ours.
Yeah. So it can't just be taken as a given like
Yeah.
maybe it was in the past.
Well, I mean, a lot of the resources, that are currently being used have been reallocated to, certain special initiatives like America's 250, sort of Garden of Heroes. A lot of the sort of functions of these agencies are being reprioritized.
Ballrooms and other things.
I'm not sure if the arts funding is going to fund the ballroom. I wouldn't be surprised, but but they're being redirected to sort of special priorities. So I think it's just important to sort of just make sure that we're, in a sort of continuous dialogue, and we're continuing to sort of follow up just to make sure that, these resources are really being used in the most effective way possible.
So there is a challenge, I think, nationally in terms of like trust in institutions, whether it's media, corporations, government, but culture, the arts kind of maintains this level, I think, of trust and connectivity.
Yeah.
So what kind of role do you think the arts plays as so uniquely situated and positioned to kind of maybe rebuild kind of civic trust, bring people together, connectivity? What kind of opportunity is there maybe to kind of, step up and offer folks here to connect communities?
Well, part of what Americans for the Arts does, obviously, is a lot of research. We do economic impact research. We also do public opinion research. And one of my favorite statistics is that 76% of Americans believe that the arts are personally important to them. That's everybody. And so I do think that, this is something that means something to all of us. It's something that we have in common. I think the, appropriations that we see at the NEA and the NEH and the sort of continuity for those agencies is an entirely bipartisan effort. And it's difficult, right, in these moments to sort of find, opportunities for common ground. But where there is common ground, I think we should, try to nourish those moments. And the arts are definitely, I think, one of those things. They certainly can, and we're seeing them, see it of being politicized and all of those sorts of things. But I think there is a sort of general sort of commitment for all people that this, is something that has value.
Yeah. So part of the civic kind of role and responsibility everyone in this room has seems to be an opportunity to highlight greater coalition building, right? And as I kind of step back and think about it through my career and my day-to-day work, is really an opportunity for everyone here to kind of build stronger partnerships with private sector partners, with other elected officials, and really kind of reframing the value you bring to your own community, right? And I think we were chatting backstage, and I was chatting with Sam about this. Everyone here brings so much value to economic development to your community. When we work with companies that are looking to bring projects to a Huntsville or a Tulsa or somewhere else, the last question when it comes to deciding isn't about the tax incentives to a community, it's about quality of life. Mm-hmm. And then that always boils down to like, will my family enjoy being here? What's the, what's the arts scene like? What's the culture like? And so on. So you will be the catalyst to somebody deciding at the end of the day. So I think, what should folks in this room think about in terms of like the value they put, in terms of like coalition building earlier in the process versus being used at the end of the process to kind of win those projects, right? Like I feel like they'll be the catalyst at the end, but they're not getting the benefit at the beginning of the process, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, we see that a lot sort of in community development contexts where, artists are involved at the, like you said, at the sort of tail end to sort of come and put this sort of cherry on top. But I think the real, value to your point is in, our ability to be really integrated into the overall process. And it's not just economic development. There's so many other things that we sort of bring to the table. And I think in your advocacy, it's important to know who you're talking to. And it's important. We have every argument. There's no downside to what we do, right? And so I think it's important to be able to pull lots of different sort of statistics. We're actually finding out, there's some research that's going to come up soon about sort of talking points, like what is an effective argument. And sometimes we've been relying on the economic development argument, I would argue maybe a little too much. But we are finding that one of the most successful arguments in any setting with folks is the sort of art and health connection. So I think that we just need to be, prepared
That's right.
with the information about, the value and benefit that we bring to these conversations and to these projects and these sort of actions in community.
Maybe talk a little bit more about that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do a little bit of a deeper dive on the art and health connection.
Yeah, well, it's like we're finding out that it's the most resonant argument because everybody has some sort of connection to that, whether or not we're talking about, art as a tool for our veterans, whether or not we're talking about, art as a tool to sort of combat loneliness or the aging process. There's data and statistics about, the art's impact on brain health and function, right? So I think the sort of, it's not really emerging research, but the awareness that this is an effective argument, I think is really helpful for us as we start to sort of go forward so that we have, multiple, I think, things to tap into depending on what the situation is.
And then I presume also tied to early childhood education.
100%.
So on. Yeah, so I'd love to dive into that aspect of it. When you look at budget cuts and, arts oftentimes is usually something that's a first cut across the country. Talk a little bit about that. What have you seen nationally?
Just so short-sighted and small. Like, I just want to, I want people to be better about this. It is the most, it's the smartest investment that you can make. We punch well above our weight. Certainly for every dollar that we put in, multiple dollars are getting back in terms of sort of community spend. So, I think with our legislators, it's important to sort of also remind them of that these are really smart investments because they're multipliers in terms of what you actually get from the investment that you make. But it's always a tough, it's always a tough argument. And I think it's also, tough is that everybody can say that the arts are important, and a lot of us will. Like I said, 76% of us believe that they're personally important. So I don't think people have a hard time saying like this is an important thing. I think it gets harder when you're like, so it's important. We need to fund it. We need to support it, right? That's the argument, the sort of pivot point that we need to make. Everybody knows the arts are important, but like, are you willing to sort of put the dollars sort of and resources behind it is the trick.
Yeah, but if to your point, making the case that arts are infrastructure just as important as these things.
Yeah, and
budgets are values, right?
Yeah, budgets are values, and I think also from a sort of city government or infrastructure perspective, making those connections then opens us up to other resources, right? That maybe are not typically sort of arts resources. So if we're thinking about how to fund our community, right? Then making those connections to other parts of the outside of the arts ecosystem between the arts value then opens up additional resources that can be funding our work.
Yeah, it's so funny. We were having a conversation earlier today about just how do you build this long-term pipeline for the arts and support arts in your community. And so many of you in this room are also here at APAP to figure out how to deal with rising costs and workforce challenges and so many other day-to-day hardships that you have to deal with. And so much of that also is like, how do you in your community have a pipeline of talent and build an infrastructure and community of culture in the arts? And if our educational institutions in K through 12 are making cuts to the arts, is your community actually building that strong ecosystem?
Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult sort of nut to crack for sure. But I'm really, again, I've been going to, lots of different communities around the country. I was just in, New Mexico. I was in Albuquerque, spending some time there planning for, our conference that's coming in June. And I was just so impressed. I think as things in this sort of federal ecosystem, are doing what they're doing, I think the intense focus on hyperlocal activity, making sure that our local communities are strong, is where we need to be focusing our energy and time. And, how people are coming together, to make sure that folks have the resources that they need, that's happening in, communities, I think, across America.
And your conference this year is New Mexico. Last year was Cincinnati, if I'm not mistaken, right? So talk a little bit about that effort, right? You're trying to go rural revitalization last year?
Yeah, well, Cincinnati is a really interesting place. We partnered with Artswork, which is in Cincinnati, which, some of you might be familiar with. But it's entirely funded by sort of corporate and individual support. So they don't get any support from the sort of local government.
Oh, interesting.
So it was interesting to sort of watch that, model at play, and how, that community, raises money to support the arts. But it was a beautiful, it was one, I think, really important. It's so important to have moments like this where we all can sort of be together. So that was the sort of primary thing that I took away from it, was just the sense of community in the room was great. But also just, seeing the way that, culture happens, and it happens differently in different places. And it has such a robust, interesting, sort of mix of, venues and cultural performances. And it was a really, good time. So just the opportunity, I think I'm getting when I left Albuquerque, I was just so excited about, the opportunity to sort of dive deeper in communities, and about the opportunity for, AFTA to, not just be a, sort of Hill federal facing organization, but about the ability of the organization to, support real work in communities as well.
How much of your time and effort with those travels is grounded in the ability to kind of storytell, right? Like capture some of these and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, actually, for Arts and Humanities Month last year, we did this sort of national storytelling campaign about, why the arts and humanities are important. So we've been capturing stories from, folks around the country about, why the arts matter. And I think it's an incredibly important tool for our advocacy. The storytelling aspect of it, because this is not sort of normal time. So the normal sort of channels of, writing a letter or, just aren't breaking through in the way that they used to. And, what we find is the most effective advocacy tool is just those like real personal stories from people. And so, being able to, gather that as a sort of movement of people that are committed to this, has been a really important sort of tactic for us.
I'd love to drill down a little bit into the models, right? Like with kind of pressure at the federal level and so much uncertainty. The other avenues usually are philanthropy, local government, corporate partners. What are you seeing out there in terms of evolving or best practices or different kind of structures to support the arts that maybe folks in this room haven't seen or should be aware of, or maybe invest in their communities?
Well, I mean, I think the folks in this room are, probably well aware of sort of challenges and shifts. Certainly, individual contributions aren't keeping pace with inflation. Corporate, contributions are down. Public support costs are up. Federal public support is wavering. So there have been, and these have been challenges that are not new today. When I was, working 20 years ago at the Music Center in Los Angeles, this was the exact, sort of same conversation that we're having about sort of fluctuations. But I think, during COVID, certainly all of that, just accelerated. And I think we were able to, somehow stabilize with the sort of influx of cash that was sort of coming, but then didn't really address any of those sort of systematic issues. And so now we have like no choice. I think that, for me, I think we have an opportunity to really think about the fulsomeness of the ecosystem, sort of the for-profit, the nonprofit, but also just sort of thinking beyond those sort of traditional structures to really identify sort of economic models that may be more beneficial to our communities. And so I think in our sort of policy research and development, we need to be pushing for a more sort of open-minded system that really allows for, I think, a greater initiative, greater innovation, I think, in the sort of economic and sort of business development space.
So I would love to hear a little bit more about your time in Chicago. It was during COVID and all of that. Tell us a little bit about what it was like being in city government, some of your work initiatives, maybe some of the stories coming out of it.
Yeah, gosh. Hard time. I mean, we came together really quickly. Like, I think a lot, there was certainly a lot of really positive activity that was happening here in New York that we were all, really, really watching. But We came together really quickly to, stand up a relief fund. And now we're all experts at standing up relief funds, which is not, a great space to be in. But we, sort of came together and made sure that, we were, trying to get resources together. We started something called Art 77, which was a sort of initial investment that we were able to sort of pull resources from, again, different pots of the sort of city government infrastructure to fund the arts and stabilize it. So we did lots of $40 million in renovations to park and sort of library, civic, and cultural spaces. And, also we're able to sort of tap into the sort of relief funds to do some pretty significant, I think, work in communities in terms of communities that were sort of hardest hit by COVID, including, our arts and public health pilot. We did some sort of creative placemaking work, and then sort of stranded relief for individual artists and for arts organizations. So in all total, I think we we're able to gather some $200 million in extra resources to benefit the community just through sort of smart strategic thinking and on behalf of the sort of advocates and folks that sort of, stood up in this moment to really, communicate the value of the arts and how deeply they were struggling. We also really sort of leaned into research, so the data was really, really important. We worked with SMU Data Arts to do, and Bloomberg Philanthropies to do a sort of state of the sector assessment that, revealed, to no surprise to people in this room, that, the performing arts and theater in particular was particularly hard hit and had some, sort of long tail effects that we were going to need to deal with. But, we got a lot of really important work done. And, it was hard to be in that moment, but I also, felt like it was, good to be in a place that I could help people. So, it was a hard time, but we did some good things.
Nice. So coming from real estate, we're always thinking about place-based strategies and creating ecosystems. Talk a little bit about the role of the arts and culture in creating ecosystems, right? Like, you may have seen it in LA or in Chicago, but when folks are, whether it's master planning or whether it's governors or mayors, when and how do you weave in culture and the arts as you're trying to create new, ecosystems and plans?
Yeah, you should pretty much start with artists all of the time. I think that's one of the, sort of initial things that I always offered to sort of planning departments was like, let us do your community engagement. And it was such a much more productive way to sort of get artists in there to the sort of initial stages to just even start to talk about possibilities. So having them there at the sort of beginning was always really, really helpful. When I was working in LA County is, 4,000 square miles. It's massive and has every type of community that you can possibly think of. And I was working in the rural Antelope Valley, doing some, creative placemaking work there. And it was just interesting to, try to pull together the sort of different parts. And I think the interesting part about the ecosystem is that you're not just concerned sort of with built environment aesthetics, but you're concerned about artification, you're concerned about the funding infrastructure. Like, you need to be sort of looking at all of those things. And so as you're building the arts infrastructure, having the ability to, leverage other infrastructure that's being built or contributed to, then just makes the sort of arts infrastructure that much stronger. So, having those two things sort of play together is really helpful.
Because in most cases, those areas that are then designated as the places to plan have usually been pioneered by the risk takers that are usually the artists, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky dynamic for sure. We're talking about, displacing artists, but yeah, I mean, there's an ethical way to do this. And I think it's just, sort of making sure. And I think artists help to identify the sort of ethical path forward too, in terms of, the policies and resources that, we need to put into place to make sure that people are not displaced and, all the other stuff.
Well, I want to segue that into kind of equity and access, right? I've been part of your legacy, your mission, your focus through your career. How have you approached that? Try to weave that into your advocacy and into your work.
It's the most important thing.
It's the core.
Yeah. I think it's important though that we, talk about the full spectrum of what this is. This is not just a equity in terms of, race or nationality. This is an equity in terms of ability. This is an equity in terms of age. This is an equity in terms of economics. This is an equity in terms of geography. And so, I think, we really need to get good about talking about all of those points. And I think it's also imperative for those of us that are in these spaces, that are in spaces to be able to fund or in order to be able to bring resources to communities, that it is on our responsibility to adapt. And so I think one of the most important things that we did when we were in Chicago is that we really changed the sort of grant criteria. So you didn't need to be, a traditional arts organization. We funded churches that had, religious missions arts missions outside of the religious missions. We funded social service organizations. We funded, community-based organizations that had art programs, because we recognized that culture showed up differently everywhere. And that didn't, just because it sort of didn't register on a traditional, this is a gallery, this is a theater, didn't mean that culture wasn't present in communities. And so our ability to make those sort of, policy and sort of funding adjustments allows us to get resources into, communities that may be harder to reach. But that sort of flexibility is, I think, really important in terms of, just making sure that we're developing programs and developing services that are, meeting the specific needs of communities.
Nice. What happens when culture and the arts start to disappear from communities, right? It's not a given that, the streetscape and that culture.
But that's just one. I think culture is everywhere. There's no, I hate the term arts deserts. I don't even know what that means, right? So, I don't ever think it disappears. It just is so close to us. I listen to music. My dad used to play old records in the house. That's not something that registers on, anybody's, economic impact, but that's sort of informal, formal stuff that is happening in our homes, in our classrooms, is just as important, if not more important.
I guess what I get worried about it in a place like New York, and when I was here, I was so concerned about is, small businesses shutting down and big box coming down, or small theaters going out of business, and neighborhoods then kind of losing some of that grit or character and defined it. And I think it's worth kind of pausing that it's not just a given that sort of neighborhoods will stay how they were, and that arts isn't a given, that it requires work not only from the artist community to be there and do the hard work, but also from policymakers and the community and the business to be involved.
Yeah.
This all requires a lot of work from a lot of sectors.
100%. Yeah.
I think it's worth pausing and saying, if they depart, you lose the vibe, you lose the ecosystem, you lose the culture, and that has a ripple effects beyond to the restaurants and to the bars and to the housing and to the...
Sure.
So I think it's worth sometimes, if we don't focus on the arts and culture, that negative things kind of happen.
No, that's what I think I was saying earlier about the economic statistics. There are consequences to this not working. Or to this not being healthy, that we need to sort of address. And yes, the loss of, important anchor cultural assets in our communities will have devastating impacts for the economy, because the restaurant next to the theater is, relying on, audience members coming to the theater to also be, sort of patronizing their restaurant. So, yes, there are impacts if this isn't healthy. There also is, I think, an opportunity in this moment to, sort of lean into the change and to think of how we can sort of get ahead of this, so we're not constantly in this reactionary posture, right? And so I think that is, I think what we need to be focused on is how do we finally get ahead of this situation, right? So that we're really armed with sort of policies, and that we're not always sort of, 2 steps behind in terms of our reaction.
We have a few more questions, but I want to let folks in the audience know we have 2 microphones up here, and in about like 10 minutes, we're going to open it up to the audience for some questions. So if you have put some thoughts, we're not going to have endless questions, but we do have some time. When folks go home, we talked about the health angle in terms of advocacy. We talked a little bit about economic advocacy. What are some other creative tools or thoughts? And that means leveraging your venues and opening it up to the community for not performances, but for community gatherings. What are some other ideas, some creative things that you've seen around the country that folks in this room should think about to bring more of a civic angle to maybe their venues or
Yeah.
to their mission?
Well, I think, the ability to sort of open up your space for non-arts related things is always a really good thing. We're in a really sort of consequential year in terms of, midterm elections and all of those things. So, I think the ability that we have, and certainly there are, sort of limitations, but to provide information and education and to sort of, continue sort of civic dialogue around these issues is an important, I think, role for us to play.
Yeah, like hosting forums or engaging with electeds or candidates.
Maybe you have to do this all within sort of, I'm putting in my, good advocacy hat. There are certain, limitations to how you can engage, but I think just, to the degree that we can participate and help facilitate a civic dialogue, that's really important.
Yeah. And do you think folks should go so far as even engage, if you're not engaged with your chambers of commerce, like reaching out and sitting down with folks and, meeting educational leaders if you're not
if you're, if you have in your, community, certainly, getting involved in, civic organizations that are outside of the arts is a good way to bridge those lines of communication.
Beautiful. Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to kind of just close out on is literally just as we're traveling the country, I always viewed arts and culture from a city perspective, and it's just as I've been traveling around with manufacturing companies and we're going to rural areas, is I've just been blown away at just the art scene, the culture from Tulsa to Bentonville to Huntsville. Yeah. And I'm sure you're seeing it in your travels, and kind of the storytelling from a kind of more rural perspective is kind of refreshing. And I think it's just so important what you're doing, and whether it's engaging with electeds or recognizing the role that plays in quality of life is just stories that I don't think get told enough.
Yeah. We need to, it looks different everywhere, and we just need to do a better job of communicating that. Yeah.
That's why I think this combo effect of APAP being in New York and kind of continuing to have these conferences here, and then you being on the road and testing out different cities is a good connection.
It really is everywhere. It is the tie that binds our communities together, and our ability to really celebrate and to give life to that and to uplift that, I think is really important, especially in this moment.
All right. So as we wind down, I want to, you can't really end a conversation these days without diving into technology, AI.
Yeah.
What are you seeing out there in terms of that impact on the arts and culture?
Yeah. I don't have I've been thinking a lot about it. I was with a few legislators, and there was sort of a really heated conversation, I think, particularly in, communities, certainly Hollywood and other spaces, where it's going to have a really devastating impact on jobs and the nature of work. So I tend to focus on that kind of stuff, the stuff that we can do from a, sort of policy perspective, and the things that we need to do from a data and research perspective to just understand what is inevitable and what is not, and so that we can be smart about how to direct resources. And it's going to require, a response that includes, all kinds of things, from training and it's complicated. And I think we need to deal with this sort of reality of it in a really sort of practical way. And we need to come to the table with some real solutions. That being said, I think we also need to just really be clear that some of this is not inevitable and that we have the power to decide, I think, what kind of world we want to live in. And this work, the work of being a human, which is to me what the arts are, can never be replicated in the way that we do the work. And so I think we also just sort of need to hold on to that. And I think the things that are human and personal, I think, become even more precious, right, in these moments. And so our ability to kind of hold on to that, is something that I think gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, well said. Because I think on one hand, there's concern about, will we need writers in the future? Will things just be digital? Will you need some of these skills and talents and jobs? And then on the other hand, there's such a pent-up desire, I think, for being in person and experiences and culture, right? Like,
yeah, we need to lean into the thing that preserves the sort of humanness, and in fact, it is the work that we do every day.
Yeah, because you're seeing it with new performance venues around. Even Netflix is opening up experience centers, and it seems like there is actually this desire that
People need people.
people need people. Some people want to put their phones down and get out and actually experience things. Yeah, excellent. Okay, we'll keep questions open, so I'll keep an eye out. If folks want to come up with questions, then we'll continue to dialogue, but go ahead.
Hi, my name is Maya Doherty Harris. I'm a student at the Bull Center for Arts Administration at the Wisconsin School of Business. I have a question about if there's any conversation about having a secretary for the arts, because we have things like secretary for transportation, right? And we take up more GDP than that. So I know these things take decades, sometimes years and centuries, but what's that avenue look like right now?
So there definitely have been lots of conversations about this over the years. I think that some really interesting conversations about federal policy are inevitably very close to us and need to be, because we need to sort of, again, get ahead of this and have some real sort of recommendations. And certainly, I think going forward, there's lots and lots of room for improvement. But I would say that, if we were to pursue this as an idea, we would want to make sure that this person had resources, right? Like, this person can't be sitting at that table not fully equipped to do the work. And so I think we need to think about building the resource. Like, what if this happens, what are they actually doing? What is the scale in which this is operating that matches that title and function? And we need to be building towards that. Because then if it's not real power, if it's not real resource, then it's just a title and not real work. So I want us to be, while we evaluate that, the game is resources for our community, right? And so we need to be focused on that as well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, Erin. I'm Colleen Jennings-Rogensock.
Hi.
Good to see you, Erin.
I get to hug you in person.
You get to hug me in person, and thank you for those cookies. As you know, I sit on the Arts Action Fund, which is part of the Americans for the Arts. And as Tip O'Neill always said, all politics are local. The late Senator McCain and Mrs. McCain were great donors of ours. Cindy continues to do that. Can you talk about our role and our functions with our elected officials in our communities?
Yeah. It's good to see you. We're on a board together, and we've never met in person. So I will hug you after this.
See, in person.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's really super, super important. Like I said, I'll just give a little bit of a story. When we were at a sort of really critical point with this sort of appropriations process for the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for Humanities, we flew in folks from communities that were in line with appropriators that were in a really important spot in terms of, the vote. And that it was like at a really critical time, and these advocates, including a few advocates who had funding withdrawn from these agencies, also showed up to these offices to make a case for this funding. I think that is the most important thing. And they're not going to, this is, we need to be armed with the data. We need to be able to tell them what the economic impact of this is for sure. But what they will remember most is that exchange, that personal exchange, your personal story, is what they will remember when they're making that vote. And that type of activity needs to happen in their field offices, when they're home, on break, and also, in critical moments when we're bringing people to the Hill. It is a 365-day a year activity. And we need to be committed, not just in critical moments, but all of the time, to be making those communications to our elected officials. And inviting them to stuff, making sure that they're out there and experiencing culture in our communities is an important strategy.
That's a great tip.
Thank you so much, Erin and Ken, for your time today. I was just wondering, because you said you have to know who you're talking to, and I thought that that was very, very interesting to hear. And for institutions, for communities, and for all sorts of, industries that want to get into community engagement, what exactly are the most valued people, part of the team, that we need to get everything done as soon as possible, like you said, right from the beginning, so that everything's handled and there's no time wasted for how critical it is with everything going on now and wanting local community?
So, and let me see if I understand, like the most important people to help facilitate, say that a slightly different way and make sure I understand you.
Everyone involved in the community engagement team, that specific, you're going to be putting together for whatever business that you are handling, institution, community, local fund, so we have that down. And then it's like, you're going to do the pitch, the 70%, the health. I just want to make sure that you have all of the people you need to initiate, to make the change, to create the events. What are the right people and the best that you believe you need for that? It's always, I think, really important to, in any situation, if you're going into a community, identify the people within that community that are already doing the work. I have learned that communities know what they need, and that if it's not a community that you're, in every day, that the best thing that you can do is help to facilitate the thing that they've been working on for decades. It's not coming in with a new idea. It's not, saying that you can solve all of their problems. It's really just sort of going in there and trying to help figure out how you can help facilitate the things that they really want in their community. So I don't know that it's, there's a sort of dream team or dream composition to get it done, except that, people have to have, a real sense of value and sort of commitment to the people that live there, and to, the ability to, help them, fulfill, their sort of dreams and aspirations for the communities, because, people really do know what their communities need, in my experience. All right. Thank you so much. And just to clarify, you're just saying to be your own advocate and to do all these sort of outreach to get people involved in the city, the chambers of commerce, you know what I mean? You want to get all these right people together. Who are those people that you need, the bones to get to the next?
Yeah. Well, to get stuff done, I feel like you need, yes, a mix of people. You need, advocates, you need elected officials, you need, depending on what you're trying to do, people that can sort of help, move process forward. And that is definitely sort of a, complicated web of networks. But depending on what it is, I think of, identifying those sort of connector type people within situations to help, push things forward.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Hello, I'm Andrew Wood from San Francisco International Arts Festival, and I wanted to tell you a story about APTACon and Cincinnati this year, and why a lot of the people in this room should consider going to Albuquerque next year. Whilst we were there, I worked with one of your interns, Camille Kelly, to found a group called the People versus Project 2025. And what we've decided to do is, as a national network, is is we're going to have artists work with the other sectors that have been impacted by Project 2025 to stage large public actions as part of the No Kings rallies, working with Indivisibles and 50-51s in the run-up to the midterms in November, and then onto the presidential elections in 2028. And we're doing a training about it tomorrow. If anybody in this room wants to do a training with us in Sunday morning, I have flyers. But there's one important part that's missing, and that's we don't have a list of demands. If we're going to be going out working with other sectors to make their demonstrations look good and make the media events and make it so that they get on television, we need to have a set of demands that we want the other sectors that we're working with to know and understand and support us on. Now, if I was left to my own devices, like the question the lady had over there, what if there was a secretary, or if the NEA was a cabinet level position, and if we were funded per capita the same as the Canada Council for the Arts, which is about $30 a head, that's what we would ask for. But I think we need the advocates to tell us what are a reasonable set of demands that we can be saying to other sectors to say, this is what we want from if the arts are going to do this for you, what do we want you to support us on? And so I was wondering if you could think about that.
Well, I would love to hear more about what you're working on. That sounds fantastic. But yeah, I think now is the time to get clear. But it's also a really difficult time because in some ways, we have to sort of plan for lots of different sort of realities. And but I think this is certainly the time to get clear about what we need from a policy perspective. And, we need to be prepared in any situation to sort of move. And so we need to sort of get ahead of all of this stuff.
I think Erin's going to be here for a few minutes, so I think we got to wrap up right now, but she'll be available for a couple minutes after. Yeah. The last bit of advice I'd give you is you all can barter, right? Like you should invite the Chamber of Commerce to your venue. You should ask for free membership, stuff like that. Like tell them you can use your venue and you want free membership so you could have a seat at the table. So listen, as we're wrapping up, I think this was an incredible session. I was so grateful to APAP for...
Can we take those last two questions, or is that...
Is that okay? Okay, perfect.
Sorry.
He gave me he said it was so tight. One question. Okay, last one.
No worries. Thank you for taking my question. I direct an arts organization that programs primarily public spaces, and we think a lot about how our work can build community power. And as I think about the stats, both economic and health benefits that you talk about as advocacy points, and then think about there's advocacy and then there's influence and power. And so we could say, yes, everyone in this room would be rational to think if everyone knows this, then they'll just change their minds and their actions. But we know that that's not really what happens. So thinking about how can we leverage our positionality together to actually build the power and to create the influence, knowing that a lot of our organizations are non-for-profits, and so we're limited to lobbying activities to a certain degree of our budgets, right? But how do you have any thoughts about how we can turn our advocacy into influence and power?
Yeah, I think that this moment is ripe for a coalescing of a sort of a movement of people that are committed to this work and sort of the broader values that we have as a sort of community. And that's the benefit of this moment that I think we have right now, is that there is this move to sort of coalesce into some movement, right? Some strong sort of movement. And I think it is our ability to, again, connect with people that are in positions of power, to step into those positions of power ourselves. There's, I don't know if they're in the room, but there are, people that are working on, making sure that artists and creative workers are trained to work for elected office, right? Those are types of things that I think we need to sort of start to strategize about, as a people, is to make sure that our values are represented in the conversation. And I think as we're going into these sort of midterm elections, is really important to ask these important questions about arts and sort of cultural spaces to these elected officials to make sure that we get their their public statements about what they value here, and then that gives us the ability to also hold them accountable to those statements.
So in closing, just a few final thoughts, right? So whether it's New York City or Albuquerque, cities and communities across our country remind us every day that culture and the arts are not decoration. They are the connective tissue that bind us. The arts bring us together. They help us weather division, transition, and what Erin laid out today is a challenge to all of us, to stop asking if the arts belong in civic strategy and to start asking how boldly we're willing to lead. So on behalf of APAP and Coffee with Ken, I am so grateful to have been given this privilege to have this conversation with you, Erin, and thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Ken.